tuberculosis, but really all over the country. And there was also a lot of stigma attached to tuberculosis because it was, though not exclusively, somewhat more concentrated among recent immigrants and people who were poor and people who were living in crowded housing. It came to be associated with all those elements, so that people who were better off or thought of themselves as more upper class, if they had tuberculosis in the family, they were often very embarrassed by it. So they tended to hide it. People tended not to tell those stories in their family once the person who was sick was better. My own mother, I was quite close to my mother's mother. She died when I was about 12, and my mother tells family stories, but I was several years into the writing of this when my mother sat me down one day and said, you know, Grandma had tuberculosis.
And it had never come up before.
She had never said that before, and it turned out long after I started this material, I learned that my grandmother had been in a sanatorium for a year in White Plains, New York, and my mother told me this story that really did start a section of the book in some way. When she used to go visit her mother, she was, I think, about 8 then, and she had a younger brother, and children weren't allowed to visit inside those sanatoria because it wasn't healthy for them. So for a year, the way she saw her mother, her father would drive her to the parking lot and stand her and her brother up on the hood of the car, and her mother would come out on the porch, and they would wave at their mother up on the porch.
Pathos in that image.
It's a terrible image, and it's very common. I've had more people than I can count call or email and said, oh, you know, I remember visiting my mother that way, or I haven't thought about that in years. So.
Well, the whole idea of a sanitarium is so, it's a world unto itself, and of course there's a tradition of writing about them, and I wondered if you were influenced by Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain, because there's some of the same certain flavor here that reminds me of that novel.
I hope there is. It's
a philosophical element as well as the sense of a closed community.
Yeah, I really thought of it explicitly in the beginning as a kind of inversion of the Magic Mountain, transposing that rarefied, wealthy European community to a impoverished, democratic, largely immigrant American community, and seeing what would happen when I inverted those elements. The whole conceit of the learning circle and the way the patients are trying to teach each other and join in community in that way is certainly influenced by the philosophical component of the Magic Mountain.
Right, and yet it's so American and so immigrant-based as opposed to...
I hope so. That was the part I wanted to examine. And also, in the Magic Mountain, we're in touch with the patients, but we're not in touch with the workers in the sanatorium. We are greeted by several doctors, but not the maids, not the cooks, not the people who are taking care of the grounds.
Whereas they figure centrally here.
Yeah, they're very important here because that's part of that experience, too. If you're writing from an upper-class experience, you're not thinking about the people who are tending the bodies or the grounds, but those were people who were exposed to the illness every day and had feelings about that, and that was their work. So.
Well, the other thing that's so striking, I mean, you did mention it in passing, is the way you do create, through your novels and stories, this network of relationships. And I think somewhere you've drawn a family tree. Where can that be accessed? Is that in the
back.
It's in the book.
It's in the
okay, I've read.
I
knew it was in one. It's in this book, because then it does send people off to find the characters as they existed before, elsewhere. And I just wonder to what degree you planned all this.
I didn't plan any of it.
How did it work out? Because often editors or publishers will say, "Oh, don't bring a character into another book. That will confuse people." Did you find any of that? And what compelled you to do this sort of networking among characters?
It really grew very organically, just sort of one led to the next. The characters are still alive for me after I finish writing about them, so they walk off stage, but they don't walk out of my head. So they're all stuck in the back of my head. I think about them. I wonder what's happened to them. I wonder what happens to their children. And so quite often as I start a new story or a new novel, I will have a shadowy sense of a character coming on stage to do something, and then a couple days later I'll wake up and I'll realize, oh, that character could be Nora's grandson, or Eudora's best friend's mother's cousin, or something in me does want to connect all those people, and there's always a way to do that. The family tree now is quite complicated, and it, I don't know, I suppose it does look planned to people, but how it exists is on pencil on a very large sheet of paper, and over the last 15 years or so, you know, I keep adding new little wings. It sprouts tree-like off to the sides or in a corner, or sometimes a set of characters will come into existence that aren't presently connected to anyone, and I'll just draw them in unconnected, and then years and stories later, I'll find some way to weave them back into the tapestry. I mean, I didn't know you before today, and now I do know you, and so now you're in my universe, and it's like that with characters. I meet them, and I don't know why I've met them, or if I'm going to continue to know them. Some of them I don't, and some I do.
Oh, well, I like that explanation. It also struck me that it's sort of like a 19th century tendency to categorize and put things into, you know, little, put them in their place and connect them to each other. You know,
I do like taxonomy.
Yeah, taxononomy, that's the term I was thinking of, and that there is a quality of that here. Certainly this book and your last book, Ship Fever, have used science, have really used scientific information to a large degree, and in the story, woven into the story. And you'll sometimes go off and really explain things in great detail, scientific discoveries or issues. And I wonder if you ever have a problem balancing the scientific with the storytelling, with the relational, and you sometimes want to just go off and deal with the science.
I do sometimes go off.
And
then
do
my friends...
and do you get reined in by your editor, or do you feel sometimes that you would like...
I do. I get reined in by my friends and by my editor.
So you have little quarrels with them about how much to include and how much not?
We don't have quarrels, but we certainly have discussions, and my friend Margot Livesey is a wonderful writer who reads the drafts of all my work, and as I do hers, we're sort of early editors for each other, and sometimes she will very gently suggest to me that maybe I don't need 10 pages on the origin of the theories of do, maybe 1 page would suffice. And my editor does the same thing. If 2 pages have survived or something, she may later on say, well, perhaps we don't need quite that much organic chemistry. Perhaps we could make do with just more of a suggestion of some of that.
And do you usually agree?
I always feel very crabby about it, and then the next day I know they're right and I take it out. But
isn't it interesting how that works? I mean, I've had the same thing where you feel very attached and you feel it's right, and then you sleep on it, and then it doesn't seem to matter as much.
No. And then I think, well, I'll just take it out just to see in case they're right, and I'll take it out and I'll look at it a day later and think, oh yeah, that's didn't need to be there. Yeah.
Well, you were a rebellious child. I mean, I'm looking at you now and speaking to you, and it's hard for me to believe that you were rebellious in the way that you describe. And
good.
You've calmed down, in other words. But you were always a voracious reader. But you were rebellious. I don't know. You didn't finish high school. You went straight into college, and you were.
Someone's been on
wild.
the internet.
Yes, I found this on the internet. But do you think it was because you had this, I know you came out of a family that were not readers, that were not particularly oriented in the direction that you've gone. Do you feel that you were seeking something, that you were unsatisfied in some way as a child, that I guess you were reading, so you were finding things in literature, but why do you think you were rebellious? What were you rebelling against?
I'll try and be discreet about this. I was a very unhappy child for a lot of reasons. There were a lot of things in my life that were difficult, and reading is a great escape. And so are a number of other behaviors that I also indulged in, but reading is the socially acceptable one, and that's the one I stuck with as I got older. But that, you know, I always feel, looking back, my life could have gone quite otherwise than it did, with just the tiniest of steps in another direction, because I was very rebellious, and I did get in a lot of trouble, and I did a lot of things that were very bad for me, and I got away with it in a sense. I didn't get killed in a car crash. I didn't get arrested. I didn't the things that happen to us when we're young and we're very ill-behaved are sometimes fatal, and I was lucky.
I was going to ask whether you look back and think of your life in novelistic terms. I mean, your point that your life could have taken another direction. Do you, as a novelist, does that compel you imaginatively? Do you think about those directions?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I never write directly from my own experience. So of course I think about the course my life took the way we all do, but I don't think I tell it back to myself in a story in the way that I would if I was going to use it as material. And my life also includes the lives of my siblings and my friends, and so I have all these other models and patterns before me, and some of them took turns that didn't work out, or that in some cases were fatal. I lost a lot of people who were very close to me when I was little. So yeah, I think about what they might have grown up to be had they grown up, all those things.
It's interesting that you say you don't use yourself in your writing.
I use my emotions. I don't use my experience. Okay. Those are very important distinctions.
So you don't even use your experience in transmuted and disguised forms?
I think it depends how you define that. When I say I don't use my experience, I mean I don't use the facts of my day-to-day life. But when we have experiences, we have emotions that go on with those experiences, and of course I use those emotions. The experiences of being rejected by one kind of person allows you to write about a completely different kind of rejection in a different century, in a different gender, but
it's still a rejection.
But it's still there. So, yeah, all those things I've learned and did and was show up in my fiction, but attached to different events, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Now we're nearing the end, but I wonder if you have any advice that you would give to a young writer, somebody starting out who might be in a situation like you were, not quite sure, but having a sense that they want to write. Have you got a few words of wisdom?
Patience really helps. I was a slow starter. I started writing late. I was very slow to publish. I was very slow to get any recognition once I did publish. And had I stopped at any of those stages, I would not have had the pleasure of writing these books and getting to talk to people about these books. I'm not the most talented writer around, but I am quite determined. And as in most fields, just being determined and being patient will take you quite a long ways.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Andrea Barrett. And thank you for joining us today at the Drexel interview.